What does being human mean to you?
Being flawed and broken and insignificant and not mattering, I think those perspectives are really liberating. I'm not a nihilist. I don't think that I have to matter. I don't think that we are perfect. I don't think that we are ever going to be. And I think that's the beauty of being human. Growing up in country Queensland, I think when I thought about that experience, the main thing that came to mind was sort of feeling different. I grew up in the world of the HIV, the AIDS campaigns, the Grim Reaper bowling down children and families. Odd, different, not enough, not masculine enough. Melbourne was less about the shift in identity, more about managing some of the unhelpful expressions of my brain characteristics, my impulsivity.
Hello and welcome to the Human Being podcast. My name's Alicia Lansdown and I'm your host. Today we're joined by Aaron, who's a clinical psychologist and the practice owner at Howearth Psychology in St Kilda. Aaron brings a compassionate, neurodiversity affirming approach to mental health, and he supports adults and teens, particularly within the queer and neurodivergent communities. With a background in clinical research on ADHD and experience across private and hospital settings, Aaron helps clients navigate anxiety, depression, eating challenges, and identity with understanding and care. So, welcome, Aaron. I'm
You,
so
Alicia?
pleased that you're here. To kick off, I just wanted to get a bit of a flavour of what your life looks like now, living in Melbourne and being a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, I live in Melbourne in St Kilda and I run a psych practice here. I'm a clinical psychologist, a midlife career change into clinical psychology after a long time in the Navy and a brief stint as a dog walker. And I'm also enrolled in a PhD program with RMIT University, so I have a bit going on. What life looks like for me, it looks like a lot of busyness, and that's probably just a testament to my ADHD, really. Um, so I work in the spaces that you just spoke about, particularly with neurodivergent and queer communities. And my research project is in the ADHD space, constructing a screening measure.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you have ADHD yourself. So, when did you discover that you had ADHD?
Studying psychology, my partner at the time was a psychiatrist. Let me try English as a first language. My partner was a psychiatrist or a psychiatrist registrar, and a psychiatrist friend of theirs who works in that space suggested that I may have ADHD and it might be worth an assessment because they saw many of my half finished projects. And initially I was like, oh, it couldn't be me. Like, I don't have ADHD because I had that old idea of, naughty boys in classroom throwing chairs. And that's not been my experience. But the more I progressed through my studies, I started to realize that I actually fall into the category of ADHD or that sort of those characteristics. I'm just an internalizing presentation, not an externalizing presentation. So rather than acting out, I focus inwards, and that leads to sort of anxiety and things like that, rather than the physical hyperactivity that we see expressed. I formally got diagnosed 3 or 4 years ago, so I was 47, and I think being able to see my past life through that lens really explains a lot of the things that made me think I was doing something wrong. Really, what I was doing was doing something differently.
Mm. That's interesting. And you also are, identify as queer or gay. And I know that you grew up in country Queensland. Um, Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so just to add a little touch onto that identity question there. So I identify as an autistic ADHD and queer non-binary man. Because my gender experience, my sexual experience, and my brain type are just not the average person's. Growing up in country Queensland, I was just chatting to you before we started. I was thinking about this before, and I'll try not to go on 15 tangents. Growing up in country Queensland, I think when I thought about that experience, The main thing that came to mind was sort of feeling different. I always felt odd, different, not enough, not masculine enough, not focused enough, not motivated enough, not sporty enough, like not enough. And that wasn't about the context per se, it was about those internal differences that I have. And most people fall into a bandwidth of this is what average or normal is. And I don't really fall into that in very many spaces. So I always felt a bit different. And growing up in that context was interesting because I was also privileged enough to, everywhere I went, find a little group of other oddbods and weirdos who became my friends. And many of these people are still dear friends of mine now. So, what was it like growing up in country Queensland? It was informative and it really informs my therapeutic practice now and the research that I hope to do in the future. Um, in many ways, it was hard, but in many ways, it was a real privilege.
Amazing. And do you think that your career in Navy was a manifestation of those feelings of not feeling masculine enough? Because, the defense is really that sort of, it is a very masculine energy.
So I think my career in the Navy is probably the result of my ADHD impulsivity as much as anything else. My sister had a boyfriend when I was, I don't know, I must have been 18. And I'd thought about the Navy before because it just sounded exciting. And he was in the Navy and he made it sound really, really great. And so I'm like, I'm going to join the Navy. And I did. So it was real ADHD impulsivity. And I think the fitting into masculinity, that really wasn't sort of a thing that informed me joining the Navy, but it certainly was something that I tried to do a lot more of while I was in the Navy. I tried to be more masculine. I tried to be a little bit more straight. I was only fooling myself that I was convincing anybody else, let's be honest, but we do what we do. Um, and that there was sort of an ongoing sense of being different because I wasn't the average masculine guy in the Navy or in defense. But again, I was also really lucky enough to meet a lot of people that were very similar to me, a lot of people whose brains function differently and who might not have been the most feminine biological female or the most masculine biological male, or who might have just been a bit of a weirdo like me. And that was lovely.
Mm. And throughout all of this, when did you actually realize that you were gay?
So I was reflecting on this and I'm going to use the language queer here. And with that, I mean my experience of masculinity and femininity, my experience of sexuality, and my experience of the way my brain works. I knew that I was queer from as long as I can remember, from when I was a little kid. I knew that my interests were not the interests of the average little boy. I knew that I really resonated and identified more with the girls in my classes than with the boys. And so I always had many more female friends than I did male friends. And the male friends that I did have turned out to be, through the lens of my work now, I can see that they were probably neurodivergent and or queer, sexual gender queer. So I that queerness ties into that sense of difference I was speaking about growing up in regional Queensland. Because I always felt that there was something a little different about me. That's what kind of kept me feeling a little bit, I don't want to say excluded because that puts blame on other people. And I don't think people were actively doing that. We just gravitate towards those who are like us. And that necessarily involves not gravitating towards those who are different. So I knew really early on in life. I also knew early on in life that even though I didn't have language for it, that intimately I was attracted to boys. It wasn't until puberty that I, had that sexual awakening and started to recognize that it was gay or that queerness. But long before that, I knew that I was different, and I knew that that extended to all parts of who and what I am. style of thought, my gendered experience, and my sexuality.
And so from puberty then, realizing this for yourself, and then going through life for so many years, it wasn't until you were 40 when you moved to Melbourne that you actually, came out.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of dig into, identity shifts and how sometimes, and I guess maybe your experience of like when you're, have a certain group of friends and they know you as X, it can be quite hard to come out and be yourself, so to
Mm,
say. Because it is a huge identity shift from the exterior, maybe not from your interior, but
yeah.
that sort of love and acceptance sort of piece as well. So, yeah, I'd like to dig into the identity shift that needed to happen and, what was Melbourne sort of, that pivotal sort of opportunity to do that.
So I think for me, the move to Melbourne was less about the shift in identity, more about managing some of the unhelpful expressions of my brain characteristics, my impulsivity. Um, you may recall we've known each other for quite a long time now, and we used to go to various social environments, and I did that quite a lot, to an unhelpful level at one point there. So moving to Melbourne was just a way for me to have a little refresh and reset my life. The identity side of things, though, it did facilitate coming out. Or I really like the language inviting people in. It's much more empowered for queer people rather than, shamefully coming out of some hiding place. We're actually empowered and inviting you into our experience. So I'll use that language.
I love
It did,
that.
it did facilitate me inviting other people in. And it's interesting because, yes, you'll recall, I sent a big group message to everybody. No one was surprised. And I said it earlier, the only person I was fooling was myself, that I was convincing other people that I was average. Um, it was the idea that I had of what my friends and families would think of me if I was actually who I am that kept me stuck more than it was the people I was surrounded with, because I surrounded myself with people like me, with free thinkers, with people who aren't as prejudiced as other people could be, with people who arguably have ADHD characteristics, so have been exposed to more and more of life and are less bothered by differences in an individual, so long as we're not being harmful. I think the circle of people that I've always been around have been novelty seekers, people who are interested and curious about the world. So it was my internal ideas of how people would respond to me that kept me stuck rather than people's actual responses. And that's not to say that there haven't been negative responses, but by and large, I think, my circle of people are good people. And so it was the ideas that I internalized as a young person, about what it means to be gay in an individual and in a social setting. I grew up in the world of the HIV, the AIDS campaigns, of the Grim Reaper bowling down children and families, and linking that to AIDS, and then AIDS being linked to the gay community. So I had all these internalized representations of the rejection that I would experience. And thankfully, it didn't happen, but overlay that brain weirdness and difference on that as well, and that masculinity femininity balance difference to the average biological male. I think that again, I'd internalized ideas of what I needed to look like, and I'd spent so long constructing the mask of who and what that was, that that was the hardest thing. The hardest challenge for me was letting go of that safety that I'd created in my own head, with the perception that I had a foolproof mask that nobody could see through.
And how did that feel, to take that mask off?
Really, really, really fear inspiring. Like my anxiety was through the roof. And interestingly, it was such a great experience for me because being able to do that, even though I had all of these internalized ideas and fears about rejection and how people would respond to me, going through that process and learning to be really comfortable with my sexuality, and it was my sexuality that I invited people into initially, then made it easier when I started to understand that my gender experience is different to the average person's. And then it hasn't been any work for me to adjust to the idea of being ADHD and then recognizing my autistic characteristics. I haven't had a period of um, self criticism or internalized prejudice about those characteristics because I'd already worked through that unhelpful internalization of other people's expectations. I worked through that with my sexuality and then to a smaller degree with my gender. So, my neurotype, I've implicitly been so accepting of that because of that process. But also, I've had a conversation with people for many years now. My social anxiety is based in my weirdness, but also somewhere around the age of probably 12, 13. Rob Collinson, if you're out, you are somebody who contributed to this. I was always really proud of my weirdness. Like I liked that I thought differently in so many ways and that I wasn't sitting around burping, farting, and talking about football. Like that's not my jam. And I love that for other people, but I also really love that that wasn't me. So my neurotype, that weirdness, it was an easy adjustment to reconceptualize myself through the lens of autism and ADHD. And it also explained so much of my past experience and gave me a liberation from the notion that I was wrong or I was not worthwhile or I was too rigid in some ways or too loud in places, too impulsive. Actually, that's just who I am. It's the way my brain functions, and that's okay. We only need to worry about it when it's unhelpful, the unhelpful expression of those characteristics.
So I'm guessing this is what you help your clients with as well. And,
I hope so.
I'm sure you do. But if anyone is going through that identity shift, and I know that you can't provide any advice or anything like that from a legal standpoint, but you know, what can you say to this group of people that are struggling with, letting people in and taking that mask off?
I would say often the reason we have those difficulties, in my experience, is because we've internalized ideas from the people around us who aren't like us. So find community, find that group of people who are like you. If you're autistic, find the autistics. If you're an ADHDer, find the ADHDer. If you're trans, find the trans community. If you're gay, move in gay circles as much as you're comfortable doing, because it is a gradual progression for everybody to challenge those internalized stereotypes and prejudices. But the more exposure we have to new ideas and different ideas, and learning that actually this characteristic that I have isn't inherently evil or wrong, which we still do have some people that are teaching their children that. And I don't mean that in parents, I mean communities more broadly. Find people like you and find the role models in those communities who resonate with your values and ask, what are my values? What do I think is important in a person? Does this characteristic that I have does that challenge my values? Most of the time, we find that it actually doesn't. We've just been told that this thing is bad, wrong, not appropriate. But when we actually see other people like ourselves, we're like, oh, you're a really good person, and you're gay, and you're autistic, and you're an ADHD, and you're genderqueer. And that's the best thing I've found for myself. And I've seen in a lot of the people that I work with that is really helpful is when we see other people like ourselves leading good lives, being good, what we value as good people, we start to disentangle my identity from inherent wrongness.
I love that. I love that. And what drew you to psychology? Was it?
This question. Well, I'm glad you asked. So I was thinking about this before we had this chat as well, and there's a couple of angles to this. One of them is I love a problem. Like I love problem solving, not just for the solving of the problem, but for the process of it. And I think a story that mum told me once really I don't remember this at all, but I can see how this is 100% me. Apparently, we had like a cabinet of some kind that was unlocked with a key. And I was little, like toddler little. I had seen mum and dad using this key to unlock the cabinet and, I don't know, take out the crown jewels. Um, and I had the key, and mum had come into the room, and I had the key, and I was just sitting there in front of it, putting the key in and taking it out, and then checking and putting the key in and taking it out until I eventually worked out that I had to put the key in, turn it, and then pull the door open. And apparently, I sat there for a really long time until I worked that out. And that's such a central part of all of the things that I love doing. It's that there's a problem, and my brain's like, we can work out the rules of this problem, and then we can change the problem. And it's not a problem anymore. So I like solving problems, but I also have a really systems oriented mind. And problem solving is just a system of interaction to make something function differently. So there's that. I like problem solving. I like understanding the system that has the problem. The problem quite often is internalized expectations of others, by the way, but I'll step over that one. There's also just that experience that I spoke about, that experience of being other, of feeling less than and defective and not good enough and weird and all of that, which has meant that, if I'm in a space, even if I'm not confident in that space, and I can see somebody else who's really uncomfortable, I am innately drawn to trying to make them more comfortable because I've had that experience of feeling uncool and unpopular. I've had that experience of, an eating difference, for example, where food was the only thing I could control at one point. So it gave me a sense of control to not eat the thing. I've had that experience of actively being excluded by the perceived cool kids because I was the little weirdo who would wander off on 15 tangents in conversation. So it is a combination of that problem solving and attraction towards systems and understanding them, but also just that want for other people not to experience the difficulties that I've experienced. And merging those two together, psychology is the perfect spot for me to apply both of those drives.
Beautiful. And, a lot of people are suffering mentally at the moment. Like I know that there's probably so much to it, but from an umbrella perspective, what do you think what do you think people are mostly suffering from at the moment?
Other people's expectations. I
Yeah,
think
wow.
let's use queerness as a really great example. Queer people have always existed. Queer and trans people have always existed, and we see this throughout history, in the histories of almost every nation. There is some reference to queerness, there is some reference to gender nonconformity or non-cisgender experience. But whether or not it's seen by the society as good or evil really depends on that society. And that tells us that this is a socially agreed upon thing, that the characteristic itself is not inherently good or bad, it just is. But the expectations of the people around me, they're what really create difficulty that we have. Autism, for example, we once upon a time had a stereotype of autism, and that stereotype that came to mind when a lot of people thought of autism was an intellectually disabled child who had autistic characteristics and might have been self-soothing by hitting their head against a wall. That's kind of was the stereotype of autism in some circles. But actually, this is also what autism looks like. You might have noticed in this chat a couple of times I've had to pull myself back from just wandering down on the thing that I'm focused on. That's inherently one of my autistic characteristics. Once I lock onto something, I'm there. And it's really difficult for me to step out. I can now because I work in this space and I know strategies that I help other people with, but I'm still not perfect at it. But bringing it back to the question, I really think it is people's expectations. And when we internalize those expectations and judge ourselves for them, a really great way to challenge that is, I think, to ask ourselves, what do I think makes a good person? And do I actively try to be that? Because that tells me what I value in people. And that tells me if I'm doing the things that I value. And if I can ask myself those questions and be comfortable, and then ask, does this characteristic that causes me distress, based on other people's expectations of me, does that change whether or not my values aligned with what I think is important and valuable and good? Most of the time, we'll find that B does not conflict with A. My characteristics don't conflict with my values. And that can allow us to sort of disentangle this notion that some arbitrary characteristic, no matter what it is, my sexuality, my gender, my neurotype, my height, my hair color, my eye color, they don't make me inherently good or bad. It's my values and the choices that I make based on those that make me helpful or unhelpful. Good and evil are merely points of view. Thank you, Tom Cruise, acting as Lestat in Interview with a Vampire, for that line. They are, whether I'm right or wrong, good or bad, is an agreed upon thing between the people around me and myself. My characteristics aren't inherently good or bad, but expectations of others can make me feel like they are.
Mm. And how do you think as well that, online content and social media is sort of either keeping people in that tangle or taking them out of that?
So I think it's actually a double-edged sword. Like, again, points of view and everything being a double-edged sword. I think when I reflect upon myself as a young person, I exposed myself to the media that most aligned with what I was interested in, my own perspectives. And I remember, I don't think it was my sister. I think it might have been a family friend had Dolly magazine. I don't know if anyone out there or you remember Dolly magazine. It was
I remember telling.
delightful trash. I loved it because I was basically a 10-year-old girl trapped in a boy's body. But I remember there was a copy of one somewhere, and I read that thing cover to cover and then more. And then I remember there was a Clio magazine somewhere, and again, I was like right into it, and I reread that. It's kind of like our modern day scrolling. I think the real difference now is, and again, this is not an area that I really focus on a great deal, but now I think we have much greater access to much more algorithmic reinforced ideas. So, if I like the picture of the pretty thing, the algorithm of social media recognizes that. And to keep me attached to it, because that's how it makes money, it feeds me more like that. So there's the whole echo chamber conversation there. Um, Taking away the conspiracy theory echo chamber overlay, it can just reinforce helpful or unhelpful ideas that I have. If I'm really obsessed with how my body looks in an unhelpful way, then I'm probably noticing content that is of what I perceive to be the perfect body. And I'm probably looking at that for longer. I may be criticizing myself for not having that perceived perception. And then an algorithm that wants to keep me engaged is going to feed me more of that without any consideration of whether it's positive or negative for me. But the same is true in a positive sense. I really enjoy funny things. I like the funny, slightly vulgar comedians because they give me a laugh. And the algorithm sees that I stop longer on those. So it feeds me more and more of them. And they're a really positive thing in my life. I love starting my day with a couple of funny reels. It's a really good way for me to start the day on a positive note. Slightly stepping away from content, though, which can be harmful and helpful, I think it could also online, the internet and being online broadly can again be really helpful and really harmful. Conspiracy theories, we know that communities can grow up online like those. But in the context of queer and neurodivergent people, quite often our online communities and online content is how we can feel connected to community and how we can feel included. A lot of neurodivergent people have had so many experiences, real and perceived, of exclusion that just being around other people physically can be such an anxiety provoking experience, not to mention sensory differences, noise, light, sound, things like that. Um, that online communities are how they feel connected and validated, how we feel connected and validated. Queer people in really far regional areas where, stereotypes of mining towns come to mind, um, online communities and online content is how I can feel like I'm not the freak or the weirdo or the abnormal defective thing. So I think, like everything in the world, there's helpful and unhelpful components to being online more broadly, but to content as well. And I think it's just a matter of being able to develop the tools and teach ourselves the tools to make choices that are in our best interests rather than in the best interests of companies that are feeding us content that we like because it increases their marketing dollar.
Mm. So, on that note, then, like, what are some empowering questions that somebody can ask themselves, in that instance?
In terms of the content or
In terms of, yeah, the content side of things. So, let's say, for instance, they've started doom scrolling on something. What's an empowering question they can ask themselves to sort of, I guess if it's impacting them negatively, then what's a question they can ask themselves if they're kind of off with the, you know what I mean? Their
Mm,
heart's racing,
mm.
they're off, you know what I mean? The whole world around them does not exist because they're
I think this one applies more, well, not just specifically to if I'm watching something and it's elevating me emotionally, but broadly in life, if I'm starting to become elevated, take a break. And it's not easy. It's easy to say that, but if I'm really cognitively or mentally hooked into this content, it's really, really hard to do that. So try to take a break when we first start noticing, oh, I actually should be doing this bit of work, but just 5 minutes more. If you're saying in your head, oh, just 1 or 2 minutes more, try and challenge yourself and take a break then, put it down. So the more we practice that, the better we'll get it, and the more likely we are to be able to put the thing down or walk away from the argument or whatever the thing is in life at those higher levels when I'm much more elevated and my heart rate's up and my breathing's up and my fight or flight response might be increased or at higher levels. But I think broadly in life, for questions to ask ourselves for improving our mental health, I think I love values-based judgments. Is this thing actually valuable to me? What do I value? Does this thing bring that value into my life or the life of the people and things that are important to me? And if it's not, then what's a different decision I could make? What's a different behavior that I could engage in that is actually values aligned for me or that contributes to the communities and the people and the things and structures that I want to contribute to? And then that contribution that in one context might be real work stops being work and it's just us doing things that we enjoy doing because they contribute positively to our lives and the lives of the people around us.
so like from a sort of day, like it's easy sometimes I think to go, oh, let's, catch ourselves in the moment or think
Mm,
about this. Like, what's a daily practice that can bring or embody that in our lives to sort of, get us on that sort of frame of thinking
mm.
to align with our values?
So I think that's a really complex question to ask just because everybody will have different values. I think if I step back and talk more in a general well-being context, and we hear a lot about this in pop psych and pop media, regardless. But I love me a gratitude practice. I think what a gratitude practice does for us is no matter what is going on in our lives, there is something. It does not matter how small it is. There is something that's non-threatening and if we can, if we're, and I don't want to assume anyone's experience, but even if I'm in a complete world where I feel unsafe on all occasions, I may be able to find some sense of gratitude for that. One or two neutral spaces where I don't feel threatened. And this is the extreme example. And to try and find a bit of gratitude there. I've also very much minimized how hard it is to move into a positive headspace. So moving away from that situation, just generally, most people in the world have something that they can be grateful for. And I think we get caught up in the idea that it needs to be a big thing. Oh, I'm grateful that I won lottery. I'm grateful that I got a promotion. But it can be, I'm grateful. I don't know how well you can see this. I'm grateful that I made a stupid bid on an online auction for this ring that I think someone's drag queen grandmother may have given up. Like
It's
it's
gorgeous.
it's pretty. It brings me joy. It's a great little stim toy. It's not going to change the world, but I appreciate it. And we think that gratitude needs to be much bigger than it is. Some days I'm grateful for the color green. I find it soothing. It can be anything. And when we get into the habit of noticing things that we appreciate, we're noticing the positive parts of our lives. And the more time I spend doing that, the less time I spend noticing the negative parts or projecting forward with my anxiety or projecting backwards with my rumination about all the things that I didn't do right. But if I then go back to the conversation about values alignment, there's some good research out there that shows that feeling grateful is a really it's a helpful and it's a healthy practice, but experiencing gratitude from other people is extremely good for our well-being. And when we're doing things that are values aligned and contributing positively to the people and things that are important around us, the people that we love usually express gratitude towards us. So, in serving others, we're actually serving ourselves. And I think that's just such a great way to build self esteem and well being and strong family ties and strong communities. And when we have strong, healthy communities, they inherently lead to having strong, healthy individuals within them.
That's beautiful. Better people, better community, better world.
Very much so.
Yeah. Now, I just want to shift gears a little bit, and I feel like there's still some barriers for people understanding. There's a sort of misunderstanding between the gay and straight communities, or the queer and straight communities. And I want to discuss with you what they are, including helping people understand, the titles that are associated with the queer community that I think a lot of straight people don't understand. And I feel like there is still a lot of judgment in that space.
Yeah. Well, I think starting with titles, I think identity and labels are so interesting because we can use titles, labels, in positive and negative or helpful and unhelpful ways depending on our perspective. And so I'll use the language queer, for example, historically, and you can watch that, what's that dreadful film, Full Metal Jacket, where they talk about only queers and steers come from Texas. So they're really using the language queer in quite a negative context. But the queer community more broadly in modern times have reclaimed that language and re-empowered community by using it as a positive thing, as a positive label for who and what I am and my characteristics. So I think labels vary in their impact depending on who's using it and what context they're using it in. But within the queer community more broadly, queer is like LGBT, LGBTIQA plus, depending on what language you want to use there. It's an umbrella term for those of us who are sexually or our sexuality or gendered experience is different from the majority of people. But within that, there is such a diversity of humans and a diversity of labels. There's gay, which we commonly associate with gay men, but actually there are a lot of women who identify as gay. There are a lot of genderqueer people who identify as gay. We have lesbian, which is almost, I don't want to speak for other people, but we generally tend to associate that with gay women. We have bisexual people, we have pansexual people, we have cisgender, transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid. So many different experiences. Where is the disconnect between queer communities and or gay communities? And the mainstream community, I think, is probably understanding linked to exposure. If I don't know any gay people, I'm only going to have stereotypes that I see in the media. And if I'm surrounded by people that hold a particular attitude, I'm more likely to believe that attitude or internalize that attitude because I have nothing else to compare it to. So, and I think this is a broader conversation around difference as well, in that the more I expose myself to different things, the less challenging I find it. And so the disconnection of communities, gay and straight, neurodivergent and neurotypical, autistic and allistic, I think the difference there comes down to the double empathy problem, which is a conversation in the autistic world about autistic people don't have a communications deficit, it's a communications difference. And if neurotypical people don't understand me, they don't necessarily have empathy for me. But also, if I don't understand neurotypical people, I don't have a lot of empathy for them. So it's a bit of a two-way street. And I think that can keep communities apart and can keep prejudices building and growing.
Mm. And so, how do we bridge that gap?
I think the simplest
Like it's
way is,
obviously it's a beast of a problem and question, or challenge rather.
yeah, I think the simplest way is just exposure. We start with educating people. This is what gay actually looks like. This is what lesbian actually looks like. I just want to say, and this is such a stereotype, but in my opinion, it's actually true. Lesbians are the mainstay of the queer community. Like, don't want to say that they're all out there renovating houses, but a lot of queer women are out there renovating communities. Jumping back from that, I I think it is. I think it's education, and that leads to exposure. So the more educated I am, the more likely I am to not be fearful of the thing. The more likely I am to interact with it and go, oh, there's nothing to fear here. And then the more integration, bad word, the more interaction between communities and subcommunities we have. So
Yeah. Well, that's it. At the end of the day, we're all human. We're all made up of the same stuff. Like,
absolutely.
I think, yeah, it blows my mind actually, just how disparate communities can be as a result of, differences in, I like red shoes and you like blue shoes and we can't be friends.
Yeah, and I think and throw
It's just,
politics or religion or nationality into that,
oh,
and all of a
yeah.
sudden we have these constructed separators, these constructed barriers to interaction and community between communities. And I think that that separation leads to fear because I don't understand you, and that reinforces
Mm,
it and leads to judgment because I see you doing something, and because I don't understand your perspective, I read it through the reason that I would do that. And so I
mm,
judge you for it, and there's a bigger fence or a bigger wall to climb between us. But
yeah.
genuine curiosity about, I found that a bit jarring, but can I ask why you did that? Between people, between groups, between communities, I think there's a powerful way just to understand one another, remove that fear through understanding and self-education sometimes, and actually,
Mm,
again, build communities supporting
yeah.
one another.
I love that. And I think, yeah, just that non-judgment lens. Yeah.
Very much so.
Amazing.
No matter if we can all take a lens and be self-critical or, self-aggrandizing, it's the lens that we take and we can apply it to other people as well. We can go, oh, I wouldn't have done that, but oh wait, why would I do that? Would I do that in a situation? Oh, actually, yeah, in these 10% of
Yeah.
cases, I would if it kept me or something important to me safe. Or uh, maybe anyway, I'll leave that there, otherwise I'll be
Yeah.
here for days.
No, that's okay. Do you think then that, you know what I mean? Because I think we've still got those mammalian brains that are, navigating our life to a great extent, more than we actually realize. We
Yeah.
think that this, brain up here in our minds, like off there, informing everything, but really, like, our world around us, our peripheral vision is, picking up cues we might see, but, our brains are picking up so much more, which is informing, all of our nervous system,
Yeah.
that, like you said, anything that's out of the norm in brackets,
Mm.
we fear. So yeah, that's interesting, actually. I think that lean in with curiosity and is a really nice approach.
Yeah. And I think,
Yeah.
oh,
Um,
if I could add on to that for just one second, I think that most things, I used to always say almost everything can be traced back to power and control, but I need to take that a little bit further and say that why do we express power and control in the world? It's to keep ourselves feeling safe. So, really, what I'm saying is everything can be traced back to, do I feel safe or not? And sticking in my lane, sticking with my community and seeing it through my lens keeps me feeling safe. I'm not challenged by that. But when we challenge that idea with the notion, not all challenges are threats. You might do something differently to me, but that's not inherently threatening to me. And being curious, I can go, actually, that could be really helpful to me too, that perspective in some ways. So we can keep ourselves safe by doing the thing that feels a little bit unsafe sometimes.
Amazing. So, how can we create more spaces in friendships, work environments, online that are, more inclusive and supportive?
Yeah, I think it is just about being open and curious to people. I think allowing for people to be themselves, asking about the thing, whatever the thing is, without any preconceived ideas, without any expectation of it being right or wrong, good or bad. I think just being interested and curious is a way to invite people in to inviting you into their lives, to their experience, to their world. But also, I think it's really important to also clock that there's a higher crossover between sexual and gender queerness and neuroqueerness or neurodiversity than there is with the typical community. So there are more neurodivergent people are queer than neurotypical people are queer, and more queer people are neurodivergent than straight people are neurodivergent. So with that in mind, if somebody is not comfortable sharing information with you, that can be one, a minority stress related to being persecuted for being queer, but it can also be a cognitive difference. And it's a lot of energy for some people to share their experience and explain their experience. It's one of the many reasons that I'm so very open and public about who and what I am, because I have the energy to engage in the conversation about identity, about my queerness, about my brain and how it works. And not everybody does. And so I try to leverage that privilege that I have by sharing my experience to save people who might not have that energy to answer the questions. So, one, being curious, but also respecting that you don't have a right to people's answer or people's responses or people's identity if they don't consent to share it with you. Um, in terms of spaces broadly, and this pertains particularly to neurodivergent people, we have the labels ADHD and autism, but what they really are is cognitive characteristics that are on a spectrum across the human race. And we have strengths in some areas that come out of these and limitations and difficulties that come out of them also. Some of those characteristics are sensory differences. So, for example, lights can be too bright for people. Mine is the reverse. I can never have enough light. I am undersensitive to light compared to the average person. I would have every light in every house on if I didn't pay the power bill. And but some people can be really overwhelmed by light or sound or too much busyness around them, too much distraction. It can become cognitively overwhelming and arguably, when we see little kids having meltdowns in public, it's probably a combination of sensory overwhelm and social overstimulation that's leading into things like that. So, creating spaces that are safe, creating spaces that have lighting that can be turned down, that don't have fluorescent lighting where it can be avoided because, we've always known that it can trigger epileptic seizures. That's, a common bit of common knowledge. But when we look at the research, around half of children who have epilepsy will have ADHD characteristics as well. So if you've got a workplace with ADHD as their fluoro lights or autistic people, fluoro lights are probably going to be unhelpful for a lot of them. And we do see that. A lot of people get migraines. Having spaces that someone can go to if they're overwhelmed, even if it's just a small room, or I'm a big fan of an egg chair or a ball chair, something where people can feel safe and enclosed and have a bit of a break from the thing. But just generally keeping our judgments, we all have biases because we're human and we're imperfect, and that's kind of what makes us beautiful, but it also makes us accidentally harmful, and it is usually accidentally harmful to other people. Trying to challenge those judgments, trying to recognize what are my biases and how might this be impacting people around me, and can I not act in a way that expresses that in a harmful way to other people? I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I'm going to pretend it was a gem.
No, it was perfect. And for people that are discovering, at any point of their life, whether they're queer or neurodivergent, what advice or reassurance would you offer to them?
There's nothing wrong with you. So I think we
Oh,
do. We internalize this idea that there's something wrong with us. Your characteristics don't inherently make you good or bad. They are just characteristics and they're a part of who you are, and they're valid. I think
oh,
if we're feeling bad about a single characteristic, I come back to what I said before. When we ask ourselves, what do I value in other people? Am I living into that value for myself? And then compare the answer to that with the question of this characteristic. Does it challenge my values? Does it stop me being what I believe is a good person? And by and large, I think we'll find that the answer is no. And potentially, if we find that the answer is yes, we've probably internalized somebody else's criticism of the characteristic rather than logically thought to ourselves, does this characteristic actually conflict with my human values, with my common humanity?
oh, you made me cry.
Stop it.
um,
I hope in a good
and
way.
yeah, in a beautiful way. Um, this might be the same question asked in a different way, but if you could give anyone a message, anyone that's struggling to accept who they are or feeling trapped behind a mask, what would you say to them?
I would say that you don't have to be trapped behind a mask, and it can feel really unsafe to take the mask off and to invite other people in. And if that's the world you're living in, find community where you can at least have some spaces where you feel comfortable. It might just be going to your queer pride festival. It might be going to a queer event. There are queer book clubs on meetup.com and, sites like that that facilitate community building. Find a space that you can feel comfortable in and masking it, even if it's only for a little part of the day or a little part of the week or the month or the year. And that'll give you some space to sit with who you are. And when you get a chance to sit with who you are, that can give us the space to go, actually, no, this doesn't make me a bad person. I'm a good person who also happens to like people of the same sex as me or resonates with people of the opposite sex, biological sex to me. Um, and that doesn't make me a bad person. So just find spaces that align with who you are and people who are similar to you.
Nice. And last question, what does being human mean to you?
Being flawed and broken and insignificant and not mattering. And with all of that, I think those perspectives are really liberating. I'm not a nihilist. I don't think that I have to matter. I don't think that we are perfect. I don't think that we are ever going to be. And I think that's the beauty of being human is look at kintsugi, the Japanese art, where they take broken pottery and they bind it back together with silver or gold glue. And I love this as a metaphor for humans because we believe that we're broken or we believe that we're in smashed and in pieces. but that doesn't mean that we can't still be something beautiful. Kintsugi pottery is inherently flawed and broken, but then it's been put back together and made something beautiful. So broken is not ugly, is not worthless, and is not useless. And flawed is not any of those things. And human is not any of those things just because we are imperfect. And we're the apex predator to ourselves, to the rest of the universe. We're just, insignificant things on an insignificant dot around an insignificant sparkle. I love that because it means that I don't need to empower myself above other people. I can make myself equal to everybody else because it does not matter whether I'm less than or more than in the the long term. The universe doesn't care. So I might as well enjoy my life and try and help you enjoy yours because if it doesn't matter, make the most of it. Like, do what does good, do what makes me feel like a good person and what lifts other people up.
My God, you are so beautiful. Thank
Stop
you
it, you're going to make
so
me
much.
blush.
Thank you so much for joining me, for your time, your energy, your wisdom. I am very grateful.
I really appreciate you inviting me on, Lishi. So, anytime.